Most women over 40 who are practicing intermittent fasting are following a protocol that was never designed for their bodies. They are running a 16-hour window because that is what every podcast, fitness app, and every wellness influencer told them was the metabolic sweet spot. And then they wait. They wait for the belly fat to come off. They wait for the energy to return. They wait for the brain fog to lift. And for most of them, none of those things happen. They blame their discipline, they blame their hormones. But the discipline is not the problem. The hormones are not the problem. The problem is that the 16-hour rule was built on research conducted almost entirely on men, and women over 40 have a fundamentally different hormonal architecture than the population that fasting science was originally tested on. Here is what almost no one in the mainstream fasting conversation will tell you. There is a specific fasting window that produces meaningfully better fat loss in women over 40 than the standard 16-hour protocol. It's not the 24-hour fasts that aggressive wellness accounts keep pushing. The window is shorter, the timing is different, and the supporting protocol involves two elements that the standard advice ignores completely. Today, this video walks through the exact biological reason 16 hours falls short for women over 40, the precise window the research actually supports, and the full daily sequence that separates a fasting practice that quietly damages female hormones from one that genuinely burns visceral fat. The invisible villain in this story is not insulin alone. In men, insulin is the dominant lock on fat cells, and the 16-hour fasting protocol is built around suppressing it. In women over 40, the picture is more complicated because cortisol and estrogen are now part of the equation in ways they were not at 25 or 30. As ovarian estrogen production begins fluctuating during perimenopause, often starting in the late 30s and accelerating through the 40s, the female stress axis becomes measurably more sensitive. Cortisol responses become larger. Cortisol clearance becomes slower. The same stressor that produced a brief cortisol spike at 30 produces a larger and longer spike at 45. And prolonged fasting, beyond a certain duration, is interpreted by the female body as a stressor. This is not opinion. It is documented in research from Dr. Stacey Sims, the exercise physiologist whose lab work at AUT University in New Zealand has been one of the most rigorous sources on how female physiology responds differently to fasting protocols designed for men. The mechanism matters because cortisol and growth hormone are biological opposites. When cortisol stays elevated, growth hormone cannot pulse effectively, no matter how long the fast runs. The very protocol that was supposed to be raising growth hormone is, in a female body, running a male-timed window, raising cortisol instead. And elevated cortisol does something specific. It signals fat storage in the abdominal region, the exact place women over 40 are trying to lose fat from. The protocol is producing the opposite of the intended result, and the woman following it has no way of knowing because the scale moves slowly, the inches do not come off, and the assumption is that she needs to fast harder. She does not need to fast harder, she needs to fast smarter. Before going deeper into the hour-by-hour mechanism, here is the practical question. What does this actually look like in a real day? Because the fasting window is not a number on a clock. It is a sequence of small interventions placed at specific times, each one designed to keep cortisol low when it should be low, amplify fat oxidation when the window is open, and protect the overnight growth hormone pulse. None of these interventions takes more than 20 minutes. None of them requires equipment, supplements, or a gym. What they all share is timing. The female body over 40 responds differently to the same intervention applied at the wrong hour. A breathing protocol that lowers cortisol at 6:30 in the morning will do almost nothing for cortisol at 2 in the afternoon. A walk that activates fat oxidation at 7:30 in the morning produces a fraction of the effect when done at 7:30 at night. The clock matters as much as the duration of the fast itself. Here is the exact daily sequence for a 14-hour fasting window, At 6:30 in the morning, on waking, drink 16 ounces of water with a small pinch of sea, salt. This supports the natural cortisol awakening response without spiking it further. At 6:35, 4 minutes of nasal breathing. Inhale 4 seconds through the nose, exhale 6 seconds through the nose, repeated for the full 4 minutes. This activates the vagus nerve and pulls the morning cortisol curve back into a productive range rather than letting it run hot through the fasted hours. At 7 o'clock, 1 cup of black coffee or unsweetened green tea. Caffeine modestly increases fat oxidation through norepinephrine activation without triggering insulin. At 7:30, 20 minutes of walking outdoors at a moderate pace. Sunlight reaching the eyes within the first hour of waking calibrates the circadian clock for the entire day, and fasted, walking activates AMP-activated protein kinase, the cellular energy sensor that accelerates fat mobilization at the enzymatic level. At 8 o'clock in the morning, break the fast with a minimum of 30 grams of high-quality protein. This closes a 14-hour window measured from a 6 p.m. dinner the previous evening. Lunch follows around 12:30 in the afternoon, structured around protein, vegetables, and healthy fats. The final meal of the day is completed by 5:30 in the evening, closing the eating window at 6 p.m. At 9 o'clock at night, before bed, 5 minutes lying flat on the floor with legs elevated straight up against a wall while doing the same 4-6 breathing pattern. This pulls cortisol into the floor and primes the first deep sleep cycle, the window where roughly 60% of total nightly growth hormone is released in a single pulse. That is the day. 4 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes of walking, 3 real meals inside an early window, and 5 minutes before bed. Now here is the timeline of what is actually happening inside the body hour by hour during that fast, because this is where the gap with male physiology becomes measurable. From hour 0 through hour 6 after the last meal, the picture is similar to men. Digestion completes, insulin falls, liver glycogen begins releasing glucose to maintain blood sugar overnight. This is universal physiology. The first divergence shows up around hour 10 to 12. In men, this is the early ramp toward fat oxidation. In women over 40, especially those in perimenopause, cortisol begins climbing earlier than it does in men, because the female cortisol awakening response is amplified by the fluctuating estrogen environment. Research from Dr. Joanne Manson at Harvard and the Women's Health Initiative team has documented this elevated baseline cortisol pattern across thousands of midlife women. By hour 13, a woman over 40 is in a metabolic window that closely resembles what men experience at hour 16. Insulin is genuinely low, lipolysis is active. The fat release enzyme, hormone-sensitive lipase, is no longer suppressed. Growth hormone is beginning its sharpest elevation. Autophagy markers are beginning to appear in blood samples. This is the productive zone. This is where the cellular work happens. Most women never wait long enough to reach this window because they break their fast at hour 10 with breakfast. And most women who do fast push past this window aggressively, hitting hour 16, 17, even 18, because that is what the protocol tells them to do. By hour 16 in a woman over 40, cortisol has been climbing for several hours past the productive window. The fat-burning gains from hour 13 to 15 begin to be cancelled out by cortisol-driven abdominal storage signalling. The fast has crossed from beneficial to counterproductive. The work of Dr. Mindy Pelz, who has spent the last several years specifically studying female fasting protocols and authored the research summary Fast Like a Girl, consistently points to a 13 to 15-hour window as the upper boundary of reliably beneficial fasting for most women in perimenopause and early postmenopause. Pelz's clinical work, supported by the broader research on female stress physiology from SIMS and from the integrative medicine work of Dr. Felice Gersh, identifies this same envelope. Some days, depending on where a woman is in her cycle, the window can extend slightly. During the follicular phase, the first half of a menstrual cycle, when estrogen is rising and cortisol responses are buffered, the window can stretch to 15 hours comfortably. During the luteal phase, the second half, when progesterone dominates and cortisol sensitivity is highest, the window often needs to compress to 13 hours to avoid hormonal disruption. Women who have transitioned through menopause and no longer cycle still carry residual hormonal patterns that vary week to week, and the 13 to 15-hour band remains the operating range. Here is the mainstream betrayal moment. The original studies that produced the 16-hour recommendation, including the foundational work conducted at the University of Alabama at Birmingham by Sutton and colleagues, were conducted almost entirely on male subjects. The 2018 Cell Metabolism paper that is cited across the internet as proof that 18 hours outperforms 12 hours, the same paper referenced in nearly every fasting podcast, studied men with pre-diabetes, 8 men. The protocol that has been recommended to tens of millions of women over 40 was never tested on a woman over 40. Subsequent female-specific research has consistently shown a different optimal window. This is not a fringe interpretation. The peer-reviewed work on female fasting is small, but it is unanimous on this point. The 16-hour rule is not universal. It was a male-specific finding that was generalized without justification. Research from Dr. Sachin Panda at the Salk Institute, the foremost laboratory on circadian biology, has documented that early time-restricted eating, where the eating window begins earlier in the day and ends earlier in the evening, consistently outperforms late-time restricted eating across every metabolic marker measured. For women over 40, this effect is amplified because female insulin sensitivity peaks more sharply in the morning hours and declines more steeply in the evening than it does in men. The same meal eaten at 9 in the morning produces a significantly smaller blood glucose spike than the same meal eaten at 7 in the evening in the same woman on the same day. A study from the Weizmann Institute of Science found these differences could exceed 50% for identical meals at different times. The clock matters as much as the duration. There is one element that the standard fasting conversation ignores almost entirely for women over 40, and it is the variable that determines whether the fast produces fat loss or muscle loss. Protein intake. Research from the laboratory of Dr. Stuart Phillips at McMaster University, one of the most cited authorities on protein and aging, has established that women over 40 require significantly more protein than the standard dietary guidelines recommend to preserve lean muscle mass. The current recommendation of 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight was set decades ago, primarily based on studies in younger adults, and has been called inadequate by every major aging physiology research group of the last decade. The functional minimum for women over 40 who want to preserve muscle while losing fat is approximately 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. For a woman weighing 70 kilograms, that is roughly 85 to 110 grams of protein daily. Most women in this demographic consume between 50 and 65 grams. They are running a chronic protein deficit before the fast even begins. Add a compressed eating window and the deficit accelerates. The muscle leaves. The metabolism slows. The fat refuses to budge. The fasting protocol is blamed when the actual culprit is protein. A 30 to 40 gram protein floor at the first meal after the fast is non-negotiable. This is the dose required to trigger meaningful muscle protein synthesis in adults over 40. According to the consistent finding across Phillips's research and parallel work from the lab of Dr. Donald Lehman at the University of Illinois. Eggs, Greek yogurt, salmon, cottage cheese, chicken breast, lean beef, or a high-quality whey, isolate all hit this threshold in a single meal. Half a cup of oatmeal and a banana do not. The composition of the first meal determines whether the growth hormone elevation from the fast translates into preserved or built lean tissue, or whether it dissipates without the substrate to act on. There are 3 populations of women who should not approach this protocol without direct medical guidance. Women who are pregnant or breastfeeding should not restrict their eating window in any form. Women with a current or past history of an eating disorder require clinical supervision before introducing any form of structured restriction, because the line between physiological fasting and disordered restriction can be difficult to maintain without support. Women on medications that affect blood glucose, including injectable insulin or sulfonylureas, need physician oversight before extending fasts, because the glucose dynamics of an extended fast can interact dangerously with these medications. Women with diagnosed thyroid conditions should also consult their physician, because prolonged fasting can suppress thyroid hormone conversion in already compromised systems. The mistake that invalidates the entire protocol is treating it as a daily endurance challenge rather than a metabolic signal. A woman who runs a perfect 14-hour fast Monday through Friday and then eats from 8 in the morning to 10 at night on Saturday and Sunday is producing what circadian researchers call social jet lag, and the metabolic benefits of the weekday discipline are largely erased by the weekend disruption. 5 days of consistent timing with no more than 60 minutes of variation across days is the minimum effective dose for circadian entrainment. The protocol does not require perfection, it requires consistency. The other common mistake is pushing the window longer, believing more is better. Beyond 15 hours in most women over 40, the cortisol curve overtakes the growth hormone curve, and the protocol begins working against itself. Pushing to 18 or 20 hours may produce visible weight loss in the first weeks, but the loss is disproportionately water and lean tissue, and the rebound when the eating window normalizes is often more aggressive than the original fat loss. The 13 to 15-hour window is not a compromise, it is the actual physiological optimum for this demographic, supported by research conducted specifically on women rather than extrapolated from male data. If this is the kind of content you want, evidence-based, no fluff, every claim sourced to real researchers and real journals, subscribe before the next video, because the next one names the 3 specific foods that suppress female growth hormone overnight no matter how perfectly you run this protocol, and the substitutions that restore it. Without that next layer, this protocol is operating at a fraction of its potential. Comment the word window below if you are starting this protocol this week, so the first comments can be reviewed personally and the most common early questions can be addressed in a follow-up. The next video drops in 5 days